Welcome to today's Explainer. We've got a truly fascinating journey ahead of us today. We're going to be weaving together three distinct fields: psychology, audiology, and pedagogy. Basically, we're exploring the complete life cycle of how we consume, process, and ultimately evaluate language. It's this massive, complex process we engage in every single day, usually without a second thought, right? But by breaking it down, we can really uncover the hidden mechanics of human connection.
Okay, let's just quickly look at our roadmap. We've got 6 parts today. 1, the art of listening. 2, testing auditory processing. 3, how children decode speech. 4, the assessment challenge. 5, building analytic rubrics. And 6, reviewing and refining. Let's dive right in.
Section 1. The Art of Listening, from Input to Interpretation.
So, here's a fundamental question to start us off. Are you just hearing, or are you actually listening? In our daily lives, we totally use these two words interchangeably, don't we? But our sources point out a really critical, defining distinction between these two concepts. And honestly, knowing the difference kind of changes how we perceive all of our interactions.
And this brilliantly illustrates the difference highlighted by the famous semiotician Roland Barthes. See, hearing is just biology. It's a physiological phenomenon, something that just happens subconsciously. Your ears take in sound. But listening is a psychological act. It is a completely active, interpretive choice shaped by your context, your identity, and your life experience. You are literally always hearing, but you have to actively choose to listen.
To really unpack this, Barthes breaks listening down into 3 overlapping levels. The first is alerting. This is your basic survival instinct, like detecting environmental cues. Think of an unfamiliar squeaking door that signals potential danger. The second is deciphering, where we start to detect patterns, like a child recognizing the jingling of keys that signals mom is home. And finally, the highest level is understanding. This one is deeply psychoanalytical. It's knowing how speech affects another person, which actually requires the listener to suspend their own judgment to truly comprehend a speaker's unconscious meaning. It's deep stuff.
Moving on to Section 2, testing auditory processing when the signal is degraded.
We've talked about the psychology of choosing to listen, but what is the brain actually doing with that sound? Well, to explore this, we turn to a fascinating Brazilian audiology study from the Federal University of Santa Catarina. They looked at 22 school children, right around ages 7 to 11, and the researchers wanted to know what exactly happens when the signal we're listening to is degraded or artificially sped up. So they used something called a time-compressed speech test, which essentially compresses words by a whopping 60%.
Now, to truly understand the impact of a study like this, we've got to define central auditory processing, or CAP. Think of CAP as your brain's internal sound card. When a sound is muffled, super fast, or surrounded by a bunch of competitive background noise, your CAP kicks into gear and relies on a really vital skill called auditory closure. Auditory closure is basically your brain's ability to just fill in the missing blanks of a degraded speech signal so you can still understand the actual message. It's kind of like autocomplete for your ears.
All right, Section 3, how children decode speech clinical findings.
So the big question the researchers asked was, how well does the developing brain handle this degraded, artificially sped up auditory input? Well, what's really interesting here is the careful groundwork the researchers laid first. Before testing the kids with compressed speech, they absolutely had to establish a strict baseline of normality. They proved through descriptive statistics that all 22 children had completely normal hearing and behavior. For example, the kids scored a mean of 47.9 on the Scale of Auditory Behaviors Questionnaire, which is well above the minimum requirement of 36. Their sound localization and sequential memory, also perfectly normal.
Okay, so once they proved these were very typical listeners, they applied that time-compressed speech test. The results? Well, as you might expect, the children naturally did better with single syllables, monosyllables, than longer words. But the data showed something incredibly specific. A child's exact age only statistically impacted their ability to decode the longer, disyllabic words. The older they were within that 7 to 11 range, the better they handled the compressed 2-syllable words.
Furthermore, when comparing these healthy kids to adult benchmarks, the children's mean scores were noticeably lower across the board. So, the crucial takeaway here is that auditory closure, that amazing ability to fill in the blanks, and overall central auditory processing, they are still actively maturing in children. It perfectly explains why a 7-year-old might genuinely struggle to process rapid, compressed speech, or, say, follow a conversation in a really noisy room, compared to an adult. It's not that they aren't paying attention. Literally, their biological sound card is just still running a software update.
Which brings us to Section 4, the Assessment Challenge, Evaluating Production.
Now we're going to zoom out to the pedagogical macro level. We've seen how sound is received and neurologically processed, but think about a classroom setting. Once a student processes language and produces their own, how do we fairly evaluate it? As this brilliant quote from our TSL EJ source points out, knowing grammar rules on a piece of paper is vastly different from standing up and producing a spontaneous speech or writing an essay. We are testing what a learner can actually do, not just what they passively know.
And wow, does this introduce a massive assessment challenge. Objective tests, like multiple choice quizzes, those are incredibly easy to grade, right? You just use a simple answer key. But open-ended tasks, like a 4-minute speech, are messy. Every single student chooses different vocabulary and grammatical structures. Because of this variety, raters can so easily be influenced by their own subjective impressions, or honestly, even just rater fatigue from grading dozens of speeches back to back.
Section 5. Building Analytic Rubrics, the Blueprint for Success.
So, to solve this subjectivity problem and ensure true fairness, educators turn to a very specific structural tool, the analytic rubric. Building a strong one requires 4 careful steps. It's not just about slapping an arbitrary grade on a paper, it's about engineering a completely objective blueprint for student success that communicates exactly what is expected and how it'll be measured. Let's break down the rules for the first 2 crucial steps.
When setting up the categories, things like vocabulary, grammar, or fluency, there are strict rules you've got to follow. They must map directly to the course objectives, they absolutely have to be observable and measurable by the rater, they must be independent of one another, meaning, hey, a bad score in grammar shouldn't automatically ruin the vocabulary score. And most importantly, you should limit them to a maximum of 5 categories. Why? Because during a live performance, a human rater simply cannot accurately pay attention to more than 5 distinct variables at once. It's just cognitive overload.
Okay, step 2 is writing out the actual levels of performance, like meets standard or needs improvement. The golden rule here, use descriptive language, not evaluative language. Don't just count errors. You should absolutely avoid vague quantifiers like few or many. I mean, what looks like a few errors to one grader might look like a whole lot to another, right? Instead, you want to describe the quality of the communication. For instance, instead of saying the student made few grammar errors, the rubric should read something like, minor errors do not interfere with the listener's understanding of the meaning. See the difference? It's huge.
Finally, Section 6, Reviewing and Refining, the feedback loop.
Because even the best blueprint needs testing, which brings us to the final phase of the communication lifecycle. After grading an open-ended task, the job isn't quite over. Instructors must rigorously review the resulting scores. If students are consistently scoring identically in 2 different categories, those categories might be confounded, meaning they're probably too similar and need to be separated. And if nobody in the class ever scores in the lowest possible tier, the instructor should just eliminate that unused description to streamline the rubric. It's a continuous, ongoing cycle of refinement to ensure the tool is actually differentiating the student's abilities fairly.
And that brings us full circle. We've traveled all the way from Roland Barthes' philosophy of active listening through the maturing neurological sound cards of 7-year-olds right up to the precise engineering of classroom assessment rubrics. By understanding this full arc, we don't just become better educators or clinicians, we become better listeners, clearer speakers, and much fairer evaluators. So I leave you with this thought. The next time you're in a conversation, are you just passively hearing the degraded signals of the world, or are you actively, intentionally listening? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep asking those great questions.